how do you market a pogrom? I mean, this is a question that I don't think a lot of us were really thinking much about before a few days ago. Not something we devoted a lot of thought to before, but in the last few days, we have seen this question arise. We've seen something really unbelievable unfold in this country, something that has implications that go far beyond the Netherlands. And what's so shocking is that this has been happening with the full connivance of the Dutch government, as well as of the international press. So I think it's really important that we try to understand what's going on, especially as we get a little more clarity about what actually happened. I mean, not everything is totally clear, but we can kind of glimpse who's behind this, who's benefiting from this. And then we can also see very clearly who is laundering this through the international media. So just to go back for a second, and it's very complex, so excuse the length of these videos, but on Thursday night, as I described in my last video, there were alarming incidents in Amsterdam. Violence between so-called supporters of Maccabi Tel Aviv, an Israeli football club, and an undetermined number of apparently Moroccan or Muslim youth. Wasn't quite clear what happened or how many people were involved or what actually went on. So it was instantly reported, despite not really knowing anything, as an extreme outburst of violence targeting Jews, quote unquote, not Israelis. It was a huge story. Now, what wasn't told at first, at the very beginning, was that this had happened after 2 days of violent anti-Muslim incitement, including shouts like, "There are no schools in Gaza because all the children are dead," and "Let the IDF fuck the Arabs," and "Fuck you, terrorists," and it just went on and on. And it was accompanied by attacks on people's property, including attacking the car of a Moroccan taxi driver. And this all happened. This wasn't hearsay. This happened in the most visible parts of this country. This happened in the central square in Amsterdam, the Dam. It happened in Amsterdam Central Station. It happened at Schiphol Airport. It happened in the Ajax Stadium, the largest stadium in the country. There were an estimated 3,000 of these so-called football supporters in town. In fact, they were hooligans. It seems pretty obvious that they were hooligans. 3,000. And we know for a fact from reporting in the Israeli press that a lot of these people, or at least some of these people, were either from Mossad or they were recent veterans of the quote-unquote war. Again, use a lot of quotes in this whole discussion in Gaza. So, of course, when you come, a large group of foreign hooligans coming to the middle of a capital city at a time of extreme societal tension, this got a reaction. There were a few injuries to the Israelis. I think at last count, there were 5 people hospitalized, all of whom for about an hour. So this will give you an idea of how this was not exactly a pogrom. This was not exactly the worst incident of anti-Jewish violence in post-war Europe, as I think the Israeli foreign minister said. And then this was followed by the usual lachrymose melodrama from the Israeli authorities. Planes are being dispatched to evacuate Jews from the Netherlands. There's been a pogrom. It's lynching. People are being lynched. Jews are being lynched. So I just want to go back for a little moment in time and kind of think about what part of this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding / tragic accident / whatever, because I think that everybody knows that if you get a big group of foreign thugs and you put them in the central part of a major city and shout racist slogans, you don't have to be a genius to know that this is going to get a reaction. I mean, really, try it. Go get a bunch of wise guys to stand in Times Square and shout about how great the Ku Klux Klan is. Go get a bunch of hooligans to stand at a pride march and shout, "Kill all the faggots," or, get a bunch of people to go down the Champs-Élysées shouting about gassing the Jews and sending them to Auschwitz. This is not going to go well. I mean, really, try it. I encourage you, because that's exactly what happened. And this was all live on television. Everybody saw this. It was filmed. Now, normally the cops would have been there in 10 seconds. And if they weren't, you'd get the shit kicked out of you. So this isn't rocket science. Again, I mean, people know this. This is not an accidental occurrence, which is what they're kind of asking us to believe. Of course, these people knew exactly what they were doing. This was incitement. And I will be mighty surprised that anybody seriously thinks, oh, just a misunderstanding or like, the whole point of this was to provoke a reaction. The real point of this was to provoke a race riot. That's what they wanted. And that is to a very small degree, small but sufficient for their purposes. That's what they got. So this messaging, pogrom, lynching, all this stuff, anti-Semitism, was taken over with a lack of critical thinking that was truly, it was a sight to behold. I gotta say, like, it was like falling through the looking glass, and like you come out into this alternative reality where black is white and up is down, and it was really like nothing I'd ever seen. I really did understand, as I said in my last video, like I understood for the first time really what gaslighting is. Like, you're looking at something and there's this voiceover that says black is white and up is down and left is right, and you're just like, what am I missing? But like, I think it's really generous to say that this was some lack of preparation or lack of critical thinking or whatever. And I want to talk a little bit about the coverage that I saw in the New York Times. And this is something that makes me uncomfortable because I've written a lot for the Times over the years. I was a columnist there for a while. My books get reviewed there. I have a lot of friends there. And bearing in mind always that it's a huge corporation. And not every proofreader is responsible for the editorial line in the international coverage. That's just not how it works. It's a huge corporation. But, for me, it's the most important paper in my country. It's important for my livelihood. So I do try to be careful. But what I want to describe is a pattern. It's not a single case, but it really amounts to a form of racial incitement that we have got to denounce as loudly as we can. So going back to the first piece that appeared, they published a quick breaking news piece that was full of talk of anti-Semitism. And I mentioned in my last video that this was published or reported from Seoul, South Korea. Now, we all know that breaking news pieces contain mistakes. This is pretty inevitable. This is something that happened in the middle of the night on a different continent. And I don't want to cast blame on somebody who gets some call in South Korea and they're like, we need this piece in 20 minutes. Because that's the reality of journalism. This is just what happens. But like, what happened afterwards made it clear that this story was not going to be reported on with any degree of honesty or objectivity at all. And I want to just kind of walk through a couple of pieces. There's been quite a few actually, but yesterday on the 11th, there was a piece by someone named Jim Tinkersley. Now, I don't know this person. I generally do know the people who report from the Netherlands and from Europe, and I've never heard of him. Doesn't mean anything that I've never heard of him, but it does kind of mean that he's not somebody that's been around the Netherlands and knows much about the Netherlands. But sometimes you're a journalist, you're in Amsterdam, something happens in Amsterdam, they call you, they say, cover this, you cover it, okay. But the piece was really awful. It kept the anti-Semitism framing 100%. It does not dismiss anything. It doesn't frame it in terms of Israel. It frames it in terms of Jews. It's not actually till the end of the sixth paragraph. At the end of the sixth paragraph, you have any mention of, quote, inflammatory actions by Israeli fans. And then what you do get instead is, quote unquote, competing narratives. Okay, so the thing is, there's not that many competing narratives. This all played out in full view, in the middle of a huge European city. It just wasn't that unclear what happened ultimately, especially not 2 days later. And this piece is full of insinuations that are really just embarrassing. It mentions, quote unquote, turbulent demonstrations, including one that, quote, disrupted the opening ceremony for the city's new Holocaust Museum. All right, so you read that, you think, oh my God, anti-Semites are disrupting the opening of the Holocaust Museum. Like, isn't that terrible? But actually what happened is it was a protest of the president of Israel in the city in the middle of a live-streamed genocide. It was a protest. I actually wasn't at the protest. I would have been if I'd known about it beforehand. because the protest included a large and important contingent of Jewish anti-war protesters, anti-apartheid protesters. This isn't mentioned. This sounds like a bunch of Muslims are against the Holocaust Museum. I mean, it's just a lie. And then at the end of the piece, he does cite one 22-year-old Muslim student saying that he had tried for 2 days to alert the authorities to the things that were being said by the Israeli hooligans, because it was really obvious where this would lead. As I said before, if you shout racist slogans in a big group in the broad daylight in the middle of a big city, it's not going to pass totally unnoticed. So, and then the piece contains this kind of, alphabet soup of that's so standard in this coverage, just everywhere. So it says, let me quote, it says, "Some Muslims in the Netherlands had been angered by the Dutch government's support for the Israeli bombardment and invasion of Gaza." I mean, this is really interesting. Some Muslims, really? They were angered by Gaza? I mean, this is great context. I mean, it really helps me understand things. But really, how many of these some? It was just some, not everybody? Because I kind of think it was everybody. But anyway, we're going to say it's some Muslims. And then it says several Ajax supporters of the match said that the Israeli fans did not stop cheering during a moment of silence in the stadium for flood victims in Spain, which drew rebukes on social media. Several Israeli fans interviewed after the match said they had not heard the call for silence. I mean, this is when you're just like, okay, Jim, do we not have the internet? Because there are gazillions of films of what happened here. I mean, it was very clear the entire stadium somehow managed to hear the call for a moment of silence to remember the victims of this tragedy in Spain. I mean, it was even broadcast in Hebrew. But by some terrible misunderstanding, only the Israeli fans didn't hear this call, and they jeered and shouted and threw fireworks throughout this moment of silence. I mean, it just really a big misunderstanding. And then it quotes this terrified Israeli fan named Ofek Ziv, who is a quote-unquote financial advisor from Petach Tikva. All right, so let's not be Woodward and Bernstein. Let's just put this guy's name into Twitter, and the first thing you come up with is, "Dear IDF, before you attack Iran, attack Amsterdam." Okay, so this is calling for a foreign military to bomb Amsterdam the way they're bombing Gaza or Iran. I mean, it's just this is the kind of people that these quote unquote anti-Semitic, victims of anti-Semitism are. So, I mean, what can you really say? Jim, thanks for the piece. No wonder so many people have so much trust in this newspaper, fresh off its victory in the American elections. This is what they're publishing. But now, today we have a new piece, which is from Claire Moses, who I believe is herself Dutch, but I know she lived in Amsterdam and I know she speaks Dutch. And then someone named Jenny Gross, who I don't know. So we still have the word anti-Semitic attacks in the headline. Now, again, also important for people to realize that journalists don't write the headlines, okay? But it's still the framing, and then you look at the piece to actually see what's being said. But actually, before I get into the piece, which is really interesting, I want to step back just for a moment because it's important to talk about the reaction of the Dutch government to this, because this is part of this framing and it's part of this gaslighting attempt. Who is the Dutch government? For those of you who aren't Dutch, this might seem sort of academic, right? But, I mean, the prime minister is a guy named Dick Schoof, Schoof, who is a person that if you have never heard of him, neither had we until a couple of months ago. I mean, literally nobody had ever heard of this guy. I mean, he was presented as this kind of neutral technocrat, above the fray, managerial type who could deal with the conflicts between the warring factions in the cabinet. He was a kind of a consensus guy. He was kind of boring. He was kind of not loaded with all this baggage. He's really impressively not impressive. I mean, he looks like the maitre d' of some overpriced but not actually good restaurant where you would take an elderly relative for a special occasion. And he's like the guy at the front who'd be like, Mrs. Moser, you're looking ravishing today. And your great grandmother would be like, oh, Dick, you're so flirtatious. And then he'd like walk you to your table. I mean, that's Dick. That's the prime minister of the Netherlands. I mean, this is where we all are. It's like, look at some of the other people who managed to become leaders of countries, but some of them really are doozies. But the real powers in the country are two main people. One is called Geert Wilders, who is someone you've probably heard of even if you're not Dutch, because he's been around forever, and he is a really creepy person. I mean, he just looks creepy. Like, he has these blotches on his face that, like, every year they grow like algae blooms. I mean, it's like really never somebody that your heart leaps to thrilled when he appears on television, which is very often. And he's long spouted the most racist rhetoric you can imagine. I mean, he was even convicted in court for incendiary slogans about getting rid of Muslims. And when I first got to this country, his big thing was rattling on about banning the Quran. I mean, so this is a guy, he's kind of a known factor, but he's kind of the power behind this very figureheady prime minister that we have. Now, Caroline van der Plas is the third person you should know about here. She leads some so-called Farmers Party, which sounds sort of cute, farmers, Holland, tulips. But in fact, her background is really instructive, because what she really was the leading PR person for the meat industry, which is, the cruelest, most disgusting, most climate destroying industry in the whole country, if not in the whole world. She literally wrote for places like Meat Magazine and Pig Business. Get it? Pig Business. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it's really falling pretty low. But like, if you were the casting director and someone was like, you need to find someone to play the abattoir spokeswoman, you'd kind of have to scratch your head a little bit. And then this woman would walk in and you would be like, oh my God, this is her. Like, she's the meat abattoir spokeswoman. Like, call off the rest of the audition. You wouldn't believe your luck. Now, these people, all of them, they're not only rubbish human beings, but they have also presided over a government that is comically bad. I mean, everything they propose gets batted down and tossed in the bin because it's either illegal or it's unconstitutional, or they can't even get it through their own coalition. And I mean, it is a chain of fools, these people. It's really just embarrassing for the whole country. So this government is basically doing nothing, right? This is the context that you really need to understand. They've done nothing of what they've promised. They're just embarrassing themselves every time they turn up in television, which is all the time. And that's why it's very hard to watch Dutch television now. It's about as shambolic and undignified a presentation as you can possibly imagine. But the main thing that I want to talk about now in context of this is that these are bad people. I don't think that a single person in this country, I'm going out on a limb, but I do think this is true. I don't think anyone in this country actually thinks that they would be above fomenting a race riot if they thought they could, like, if they had any benefit to doing this. Because for me, the question, coming back to the real question of this, is like, who benefits from this? How is this so-called pogrom, this so-called anti-Semitism, being laundered? Why are all these people signing up to pretend like something happened that is really obvious that didn't happen? And so, most people would think race riots, not a good idea. I mean, you can be on the right, you can be on the left, you can be in the center. Most people are going to think this, but like, some people see this as an opportunity. I mean, it's almost the definition of demagoguery is, and so you have to look at who benefits from this. And the first answer is obviously Israel. You see Netanyahu saying, thank God there's a state of Israel, because, Jews can't live in horrible Amsterdam. Now, the state of Israel is the most hated state in the world. I think it's pretty fair to say. I think it's a state that's been committing genocide. It's a state that needs a little publicity boost, also putting it mildly. And And it needs a way to present itself as a victim. So this has kind of worked, for days here and all over the world. There's been nothing or hardly nothing about the genocide, the actual genocide. There's nothing about the pogroms, the actual pogroms that are happening in the West Bank. There's nothing about Lebanon. There's nothing about Gaza, where Israelis are filming themselves blowing up people's homes and shouting Amsterdam, or like, this serves you right for Amsterdam, to, these people thousands of miles away that have absolutely nothing to do with it. There's nothing about the hundreds of people killed in the Middle East since this great tragedy that resulted in 5 people being hospitalized for less than an hour. But anyway, coming back to the Times piece, what I want to say is that Claire Moses and Jenny Gross take over with zero criticism, with not one single Muslim voice or quote, which actually Jim did actually have a Muslim student. At least that was a little improvement. But you have the government's transparent bullshit narrative being presented here. So you have Dick, our friend Dick, the maitre d', saying that the people being held, which is a total of 8 people, to give an idea of what the Israelis are calling the worst incidents of violence in Europe since the 1940s. 8 people, and saying they, quote, primarily have a, quote, migration background. Now, just a little translation here. This means Muslims. Like, if I, as a white American, got arrested for something, they would not say he has a migration background, although I do. Technically, this means brown people that we don't like. And then he says, quote, we have an integration problem. This is an expression of that. Okay, again, there's no criticism from these journalists of this. So what this really is about is Muslims, migration background, and they're unassimilable, and they're basically terrorists. And they, it's too bad. We tried our best, but we can't really live with these people. I mean, this is something that if you've been in this country, we have heard this for years and years and years and years. They're unassimilable. They're basically terrorists. So then you go a little farther down the piece and you have October 7th, of course, because nobody's heard of October 7th. Then you have a reference to, quote, the protest that disrupted the opening ceremony for the city's new Holocaust Museum. Again, the same insinuation the Muslims are against the Holocaust Museum. There's no mention of the Jews protesting. There's no mention of the fact that it was a protest against the president of Israel. It had nothing to do with the Holocaust. And then you have anti-Semitism named twice in a single paragraph. And then you have 2 kids under age 18 getting arrested in Antwerp. Antwerp, if you will recall, if you are a graduate of 5th grade, it's in a different country, for allegedly saying anti-Semitic things online. Okay. Then you have 5 more people getting arrested in Antwerp, recalling once more, different country, for similar crimes, though, saying anti-Semitic things online. And then it says, but they were released without charges. So what the hell is this in this piece for? Why are we just insinuating that like the internet is aflame with Muslim hatred for Jews? And then it says, nothing is an excuse. This is Dick again. Nothing is an excuse for hunting Jews. He added that his priorities were to fight anti-Semitism and, quote, to arrest those people who did this, quote. So we have this again, hunting Jews. Okay. And then it says he's going to introduce, quote unquote, tough measures in Parliament. Now, Claire Moses is, I believe, from Amsterdam. She certainly speaks Dutch. Don't tell me this is some innocent or like hastily written thing in the middle of the night and she got a little footnote wrong here and there needs to be a correction. Like Jim's piece had a correction at the end and it was like he misspelled somebody's name by 1 letter. This is not what it is. She's aware of this incredibly fierce debate around all these extremely inflammatory and contentious words. She is aware that many, and I emphasize many people in this country do not believe this total bullshit narrative. The pushback has been very intense in the Dutch press. There have been lots of stories discredited, including today I saw the Amsterdam mayor's office said that it's not in fact true that Hamas claimed these attacks. We couldn't have a day go by without talking about Hamas. So this is as bad a piece of journalism as I can remember, although, which is a, hard standard to meet considering this paper's record of publication on Israel. But finally, I really do want to address real anti-Semitism. Are Jews scared in this country? Like, abso-fucking-lutely they are. And should they be? Yes. I am myself horrified. I'm frankly quite scared for what could happen. I'm not really scared for myself, although maybe that's naive, but I am scared for what could happen. And, you'll often hear that there's been an uptick in anti-Semitism here. And I wanted to quote something that my friend Gary Schwartz, who's a Dutch-American art historian, very distinguished art historian, has written in his newsletter today. It says, the records of the Dutch Center for Information and Documentation Israel registered in 2023 a mounting number of anti-Semitic incidents. Okay, so this sounds really bad. Mounting number of anti-Semitic incidents. Peaking about one a day in a country of 17 million of some 1 million who were Muslims. More than half of them are written expressions. So this is like, something online or a text or whatever. Okay, the only physical violence it reported, even after October 7th, concerned school children and students hitting Jewish classmates while calling them names. Okay, nobody is in favor of hitting Jewish students or kids, obviously. But there's a difference between a pogrom and calling somebody a name. So this means that the perpetrators let us assume they were indeed all young Muslim Dutchmen with roots in Morocco, had never before last Thursday harmed a hair on the head of a Dutch Jew. Again, 0 violent incidents. That evening then, they were after the 3,000 Israelis in Amsterdam for a soccer match, some of whom that morning had marched through the streets. And then he quotes some of the things that they shouted about killing Arabs. And, saying this in Amsterdam implies that the Dutch Muslims are their enemy, right? And so if Dutch Muslims saw this as a call to kill them, this is Gary again, their feelings will not be very different from those of Dutch Jews who feel threatened. And then he says, believe me, I feel deeply the pain of Dutch Jews. I am one of them. But I do not see how we are helped by a distortion of the nature of events that is starting to lead to measures that only exacerbate antagonism between groups in our own country. Again, there's a reason you don't provoke race riots. And one of the reasons is that a lot of innocent people get hurt. A lot of Jews are really scared right now. And we all have a very vivid memory, especially in this country and the other countries where the Nazi Holocaust happened, of what can happen when this kind of violence is unleashed by these kinds of people, these kinds of racist demagogues. And I think what's not being said, though, in so much of this commentary is that Muslims are even more scared than we are. I mean, nobody in the national government is saying Jews should be deported. Nobody's saying there should be fewer Jews, as Wilders said and actually got convicted in court for saying. If Jews get attacked, Muslims will get attacked, and vice versa. And everybody knows this. If anyone thinks that Muslims somehow missed the memo of what would happen to them if they started attacking Jews in any Western country, they're living in a completely parallel universe. I mean, the Muslims here are absolutely panicked about what's going to happen to them after this. This dick is already announcing they're going to take strict rules in parliament and blah, blah. So, I mean, this is real. This is not something that they think is theoretical. And, it's also really important amidst all this quote unquote anti-Semitism to realize that we as Jews are a protected class. We have all the state apparatus behind us. We have the military, the police, everything supports Jewish life. We do not have raving anti-Semites in the government. The Muslims, they do. This is their reality every day. They see a government that's not only stirring up racism toward Muslims in this country, but a government that's actively aiding and abetting the slaughter of Muslims in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran. I mean, they're fucking terrified. And this is why they warned and warned and warned against these hooligans. So it's important when you read this stuff to realize these people who are talking about anti-Semitism and all this, these are bad people. And there's a word for people who hang out with Nazis and who vote with Nazis and who promote Nazi policies. And that word is Nazis. So these are really the lowest class of people. People who go along with racism, people who lend their intellectual, political, journalistic credibility toward the promotion of genocide. I mean, I just don't have a lot of time for them.